graders, and welcome to lesson 57 on simple probability. So our first vocab word is probability, how likely it is for an event to happen. Chance is another word that we use when we're describing probability and all of that good stuff. So here we go. Probability and chance can be shown with a fraction. They can be shown with a percent. So 0 means that something is impossible if it has a 0% chance of happening, or if it's 0 out of whatever 5 chances, then that means it is impossible. 1 or 100% means that it's certain for whatever favorable thing you want to happen. Okay, the probability is certain, it's 100%. And then right in the middle, we have half or 50%. And this means that it's equally as likely. Okay, so here it's equally likely for something to happen if it has a probability of 1/2 or a 50% chance, 50% chance. We call anything in between 0 and 50 or 0 and 1/2 for fractions unlikely. And we call anything between 1/2 and 100% or 1/2 and 1 likely. Okay, you're going to need to know those terms: impossible, unlikely, likely, and certain. Outcomes are possible results of an experiment. So if I do an experiment, if I flip a coin 6 times, then every time I flip the coin, the outcome could either be tails or it could be heads. So I have 2 possible outcomes. My outcomes, when I add up the probabilities of all the outcomes, like the probability of getting tails would be 1/2, and the probability of getting heads would be 1/2. When I add them up, it's always going to equal 1. Here's our first example. A dot cube, that's like this. Cube you play for games, right? A dot cube is rolled once. Describe each event. When you see this word describe, it wants you to use these terms: impossible, unlikely, likely, or certain. So with the number cube, what is the probability that it will stop with 3 dots on top? Well, I'm going to think how many times out of my 6 possible outcomes, because there's 6 sides to this die, right? So my total amount of outcomes is going to be 6. And the probability of getting a 3 is only 1 out of that 6. And so I'm going to say that the probability of that happening, since it's only 1 out of 6, that's less than 1/2. It doesn't seem like it's very likely. I'm going to call it unlikely. What is the probability that it will stop with more than 2 on top? Okay, actually here, why don't we write what it is as a fraction too? So what is the probability that it will stop with more than 2 on top? Well, more than 2 means that it could be a 3, it could be a 4, it could be a 5, or it could be a 6. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 possible outcomes in that case out of the 6. So 4 out of 6 would reduce to 2 out of 3. But if we look here, is that out of 6 possible is 4 chances? Do you think that that's more towards unlikely, more towards likely, impossible, or certain? Good. It's likely to happen. What about the probability of it stopping with less than a 7 on top? Well, less than a 7 would be outcome if it got a 1 or 2 dots or 3 dots or 4 dots or 5 dots or 6 dots. So out of the 6 total, there's 6 options where it will land with a number that has less than 7 dots on top. So what do we call it if every single one of the outcomes is favorable? Well, we call it certain, because 6 over 6 is the same thing as 1, which we learned yesterday. So we're going to say certain. Okay, what is the probability that it will stop with more than 6 on top? Well, it could have 1 dot, 2 dots, 3 dots, 4 dots, 5 dots, or 6 dots, but none of those are more than 6. So that means that this is 0 out of 6, which means that it is impossible to happen. All right, why don't you go ahead and do E on your own? What is the probability that it would stop with a 1 or 2 dots on top? So figure out which cases would have 1 dot or 2 dots, put it over 6, and then decide if you think that that is impossible, unlikely, 50%, likely, or certain. All right, here's our second page. So another type of probability experiment. Find the probability of each event and write it as a fraction. So this P means probability of, and then there's something in parentheses. So find the probability of getting an A. Well, first I need to count up my total possible outcomes. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different boxes. And this told me that each sector is equal, okay? So I know that they're all equal, so I have a total of 5. So my denominator of my fraction, the total amount of parts, is going to be 5. So what is the probability of getting an A? Well, I have one case where it could be an A, so my probability will be 1/5. What about the probability of getting a B? You do that one. What is the probability of getting a C? 1, 2, 3 C's over 5 possible ones. What is the probability of getting an A or a B? So I could get an A or a B, so that's a probability of 2 out of the 5. And do this last one yourself. What's the probability that I could get a D? Oh, there isn't a D there. So what should I write? What would that be? Think back to what we did on the first page if you're unsure. All right, and here is our last type of example. A bag contains 5 red balls, 3 blue balls, and 2 yellow balls. We pick one ball. What is the probability that it's blue? Well, first thing I have to do is count up the total amount of balls that I have. So I have 5 plus 3 plus 2. 3 and 2 is 5. 5 and 5 is 10. So there's a total of 10 balls in this bag that I've got. What is the probability that one of them will be blue? Well, the favorable outcomes is I would get a blue one. And since there's 3 blue, that's going to be my numerator. And my denominator is going to be 10 because that's the total choices of balls that I could have picked out. What about B? What is the probability of not getting blue? Well, if there's 3 blue ones, then what's left over would be the other choices, right? So I could just subtract 10 minus 3 and get 7, or I could count up all the ones that are not blue. So 5 red, those aren't blue, and 2 yellow, those aren't blue either. So 5 plus 2 is 7, so 7 over 10. Go ahead and try this one on your own. What's the probability of getting a red one? And don't forget to reduce those probabilities if it works out to be a fraction that can be reduced. All right, so I look forward to seeing you in class tomorrow. Go ahead and get to work.